So for those of you who don't know who we are, TGO, we are financial systems specialists focused on the office of the CFO. We guarantee the success of all of our projects at a fixed price. So at TGO, we're always looking for ways to educate our clients and prospects with new solutions to help them enhance their Dynamics GP solution. So for the month of March, we had a 3-part webinar series that looked at predictable revenue forecasting. And today's webinar actually concludes that series with a look at analysis cubes in Dynamics GP. As a little preview, next month we will be looking at automating your processes with 3 brand new webinars. So with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Grantley.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. Quick introduction to myself. I'm a solution architect at TGO Consulting, been working with GP and other ER products for quite some time. And as Kathleen just said, today concludes our series on revenue predictability, and we wanted to conclude that with a look at what Dynamics GP can offer us in terms of revenue predictability. So I wanted to keep this fairly hands-on and make this very much a tutorial exercise for everybody in case you haven't seen these tools before, just to give you some insight into how easy they are to work with and how easy they are to use. So what I'm going to be going through today is in relatively straightforward terms, we're going to take a look at a thing called the data warehouse. So this is a tool, this whole thing is a tool that comes with Dynamics GP. It's out the box, it's part and parcel of everybody's licensing. And so we're going to take a look at the data warehouse itself, and I'm going to explain to you a few things about the warehouse and what that is and why it is. Then we're going to look at the cubes themselves, formerly called analysis cubes, currently referred to by Microsoft as SQL Server Analysis Services. We're going to talk a little bit about a thing called perspective, which is something unique to an analysis cube, and it talks about the difference in how you can view the cube. Same data, different perspective, and we'll talk about that past and future. Then we're going to look at doing something real simple in Excel as a tutorial exercise. And then finally, we're going to talk about a couple of other tools that are available that can do bigger and badder things, just in case you're not familiar with them today. So it's a pretty straightforward agenda. And then I'll be around for questions at the end, of course. If you'd like to type your questions into the question box as we go, that would be great. But if not, Kathleen will be back here to administer at the end of this. So without too much further ado, let's jump out and actually look at stuff live. So the first thing I wanted to do was take you over to here. We'll just log into my image here. And let's start with getting the password right. So let's talk first of all about the data warehouse. So what Microsoft has done with GP is they've connected it to a data warehouse. And the data warehouse is a set of tables. It's a subset of tables from the GP live production databases. And this subset of tables has been created to present multiple sets of data. Within those subsets, you will see that what they've done with these tables is that they have named the tables relatively normally. And if we were to even look at a table, if we were to look at like sales detail, for example, and take a look at the sales detail table, which is sales line items from GP, you'll see that they've also renamed all of the fields. If you've ever looked at the field names or the table names in GP, you'll know, for example, that the sales detail table is SOP 10100, SOP 20100. They've called it sales detail. You'll know that the customer number is called CUSTNMBR. They've called it customer number. So what they've done with this warehouse is they've taken a subset of the data that's in GP and they've normalized the table names and they've normalized the field names so that ordinary people like you and I can actually understand what we're looking at without having to learn jargon or look stuff up. The second thing that the warehouse does is it runs in what they consider to be real enough time. So the warehouse doesn't update every time you post a transaction because that would obviously slow down the system. So the warehouse only updates periodically. You can set the frequency with which it updates. Overnight is very, very typical, but you can run it more frequently than that. So what it's doing is a refresh of incremental new data. It's not calculating everything every single time. Okay, so that's our data warehouse. Set of tables, normalized table names, normalized field names, periodic update refreshes to it so that the data is in real enough time. Okay, so that's our warehouse. Now that warehouse can be multi-company, so it understands the idea of having more than one company. You'll see one of the very first fields in every table is company ID. So if you're running in a multi-company environment, you can actually consolidate all of your different companies' data into one warehouse. The other thing that the system understands is multi-currency. So you'll see both originating, functional, and if we were to keep going, if we look through all of these fields, eventually you'll find reporting currency. So it understands 3 different currencies. The originating currency of the transaction in its source database, the functional currency, the translated functional amount of that transaction in its source database, and then thirdly, a reporting currency. And reporting currency is something that you set up. It relies on Dynamics GP translation tables to calculate, but what it will do is it will allow you to run in a multi-currency environment. So if you have a Canadian company and a US company and you want your warehouse that we're going to build our reports on to operate in a single currency, you can actually set it up to translate US to Canadian or Canadian to US, whichever way around you want to go from a reporting perspective. Okay, so we have our tables, we have our multi-company environment, we have our multi-currency environment, so now we're all consolidated and we're all talking the same language and the numbers are the numbers and there's no variation in that. Once you have the warehouse set up, the next thing that they provide us with in SQL Server Analysis Services is a set of cubes. And the cubes are basically taking those core tables and making them 3-dimensional. So they're taking, for example, the sales detail table, which is the lowest level of detail that comes out of GP, which is the sales line item on an invoice in sales order processing. And they're connecting to it the customer table and everything we know about customer, and the inventory item table and everything we know about inventory, and the date tables and everything we know about date and date logic and date aggregation. And what they're doing by doing that is they're building a cube. Think of it as a massive pivot table in which they've dragged in multiple sets of data and connected them all to one core piece of data. In the case of the sales cube, that's sales line item. In the case of, if we look at the list here, the financials cube, that's journal entry lines. The inventory cube, inventory transactions, payables, purchasing, receivables, and sales, so on and so on and so on. So these are the cubes that they've given us out the box: financials, inventory, payables, purchases, receivables, sales. And just to explain the difference for those of you that aren't familiar with it, payables is what's going on in the payables subledger, whereas purchases is what's going on in the purchase ordering module. Likewise, receivables is the subledger, sales is sales order processing. So they've given us 2 different sets of data for sales and purchasing, depending on whether we're looking at posted transactions in the GL or whether we're looking at the subledger detail, because obviously payables has no detail and receivables has no detail. It's a one-line entry. So if we want to do any kind of analysis, which was the purpose of today, predictable revenue analysis, so today's sales analysis, we need to be able to get to the details. They've also added, if we take again the sales cube as an example, they've also added a thing called perspective. And perspective is the difference between posted transactions and unposted transactions in the case of the sales cube. So what this means is that we can look at sales detail, which they've labeled here, which is posted sales transactions, or we can look at pending, which is unposted sales transactions. So this is where we play into the theme of predictability, our ability to look at the past, sales detail, and to look to the future, what they've labeled pending sales orders. And the cube contains both. And when we actually connect to the cube, you'll see how you can look at either of those or the 2 of them together. And that's the purpose of today's example. Within that, they have created a series of additional measures. So what they've done is they've added calculated fields into the cube. So some things GP does know about. GP knows about revenue on an item, and GP knows about cost of goods on an item. But GP itself doesn't know about profit. Profit percentage, margin percentage, all those things are calculations based off of the only things that GP does know, which is revenue and cost of goods. So into these cubes, they've added various and assorted calculations that allow us to have pre-aggregated numbers for margin percentage, for profitability percentage, for just pure dollar profit, all the things that GP in and of itself doesn't know about. On top of that, they've then layered what they call roles, and roles is security. So on top of all of this content, we also have a very, very strong security model. And the security model can be as open as you can get to the cube or you can't, or it can be as precise as you can only see things when salesperson ID equals X. And you can set that for every single person that's ever going to look at a report that comes off of these cubes. And whenever they look at it, because they're set up based on Active Directory, we know who's looking at it, and the data is automatically filtered. So we can create a single report, we can share it with 50 people, and they could all see just their sales. And then we could share it with their manager, who can see a group of people's sales, and we could share it with the CEO, who sees everybody's sales, but they could all look at the same set of data. And that security model applies to any of what they call dimensions. So dimensions are master records, their customers, their vendors, their salespeople, their locations, their territories, their whatever we choose them to be. We can apply security to a very, very granular level, right the way down to the individual value within a dimension. So we have these cubes. These cubes are pre-processing, so they run really, really fast. So they process after the warehouse is refreshed. So let's say every night the cubes recalculate everything, so that when we hit the cube, it's really, really fast. It also means we're not hitting live data, which means we're fast as well. It's not slowing us down any. So all that's really left to do after all that is to actually report on this information. And I wanted to show you not how familiar everybody is with the latest version of Excel, but for example, here is a view of the sales cube. And we've pulled in just into a pivot table. If I just click on here so you can see the pivot table, all we've done is we've connected to the cube and we've pulled in some fields. One of the things that I wanted to show you was some of the straight out the box Excel functionality. So if I click off of the pivot table, these are, for those of you who are not familiar, these are slicers. These allow us to filter the data within our pivot table or within our pivot chart. Obviously, we can use the drop-down filters available on the actual chart itself, but slicers are related to each other, so they allow us to do some kind of cool stuff. For example, if I was to click on the US, you would see all the other filters change, and all the other filters grey out or light up based on which other filters have values that are related to the one that I've picked. So I picked the US, it's immediately changed, and I'll just put it back so you can see it. If I picked the US, it immediately changed the number of salespeople, and it changed the report itself. You'll see the dollars change, the customers change. And if I was to look at just a salesperson, you'll see it change again. So all this is out-of-the-box Excel functionality. It happens to be immensely powerful because it's connected to a cube and because the cube is processing vast amounts of data very, very quickly and pre-calculating things that GP doesn't know about, like profit. But these are actually really quite simple to build. So what I wanted to do for the purposes of today's presentation was to give you a live presentation of how to build a revenue forecast report off of the sales analysis cube in GP. So we'll start with a completely blank spreadsheet. And the first thing we've got to do is connect that sales cube. Now, if you've done that before, if you have previously connected to your sales cube, then under data, you'll find it in existing connections. If you've never connected to your cube before, if it's only just been installed, if it's only just been deployed, if it's never been implemented previously, then you're going to have to start a new connection, and you're going to go from other sources, and you're going to pick analysis services. You'll see Excel actually has some other connectors available as well, but we're going to go for analysis services. The next thing you need to do is you need to know the name of your server. In the case of this one, it's local to my image, so I can cheat and just put the dot in, but technically you need to know the name of your analysis services server. It will use your Windows authentication, because that's our security model. So it's going to log in as me. It's going to show me a list of the cubes that are on that server that I have security to connect to. If I don't have security to connect to it, it won't be in this list. And we're going to pick the sales cube. And we're going to go next. It's going to give it a connection name. That's fine. And we're going to finish. In this case, obviously, because I've done it previously, it's already there. So if it was already there, I could go to my existing connections and find my sales cube connection, like that. First thing it wants to do, automatically when you connect to a cube, the first thing it wants to do is create a pivot table. It assumes that's the best way of interpreting the data in an analysis cube. And for basic purposes, it is. So we'll just let it drop the cube in the top left corner. We don't need to be too picky about it right now. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to show you was this idea of perspective. So if you look here, I have multiple sets of measures, multiple values, multiple lists of dimensions, which are all of these blue stripy things are. But let's look at our measures for a minute. Pending sales order and sales detail. Remember we talked about that earlier, the idea of being able to look at the past and the future. The sales cube contains both. We can choose to only show the fields related to one or the other measure. So if we are specifically reporting on sales detail and we don't want to accidentally pick a dimension or a value or a number that belongs to pending sales orders by mistake that would mess it up, we can pick to only look at sales detail, and it will immediately shorten the list for us. So we've lost the other perspective. If I put it back to all, we get to see both. So if you just take a look at the fields that are available to us, you'll see there's base, quantity sold, extended cost, extended price, freight, markdown, profit, and the same pretty much in sales detail. You'll see there are some values that are calculated on the fly, again for detail and for pending perspectives, margin percentage, markdown percentage, year-to-date pricing, year-to-date costing, and then you get into the dimensions, and these are the things that we could be filtering through security or we could be using as part of our report. So customers, company, if we keep going down, date, the actual sales detail table itself. So just trying to move another window out of the way. I've got too much going on my screen. So a number of different fields we could pick from. So what we want to do is try and build this revenue forecast report. So let's add extended price detail, posted sales, and let's add extended price pending open orders. See how quickly it retrieves that data? Relatively straightforward so far. So extended price detail means posted sales, and we can actually change it to be called posted sales. You can change the label, you can change the formatting, you can do a number of things, but for now we'll just leave it as it is. It's fine. You can actually come up here and just do this if you wanted to. Posted sales, and we can switch that one to be called open orders. Easy enough so far? So the next thing we could do is we could add, let's add the date to this. So let's scroll down here and let's find the date field. Where's our date field? There's a date field, so let's grab our date field and we will throw our date field into a filter at the top of the page. I happen to want to only look at 1 year right now, so I'm going to open this up and just look at 2017. If I wanted to look at more than 1 year, I can turn on select multiple, and if I want to look at part of a year, then our date function automatically knows about year, quarter, month, day. So it goes right the way down to the day. But for now, we're just going to pick a year, 2017. I want to see what this year's revenue is going to look like. Okay, so that's this year's current revenue, posted and predicted revenue. The next thing I'm going to do is show you an example of one of our dimensions with drill down. So for example, we have a field here that's customers by location, which means it's more than one tier deep. If I just look at the list of normal fields, you'll see I can grab any one field from the customer table. I can get the city, the state, the province, the customer number, the over their credit limit flag, the sales manager, the sales territory, the salesperson. I can get to any one of those individual fields, but if I just look at the list with the arrows beside them and we look at something like customers by location, you'll see that that has a built-in drill down that goes country, state, city, customer, or in our case, country, province, city, customer. So if I pick one of those fields that has a drill down, and let's just throw customers by location onto the row, I've now got a breakout of my sales posted and predicted for 2017 by country, by province, by city, by customer. So now I've got some analytics. Now I've got some stuff I can see. If I was to break out one of the numbers that actually has a forecast on it, for example, if we look at BC, Vancouver, you'll see I've got customers with current sales, and I also have one future order in the system for Vancouver Resort Hotels, apparently. So any of those fields on the right-hand side with the arrow next to them are a drillable field. They have multiple levels to them. They're actually just not a flat dimension like customer name. They're a hierarchy. And the hierarchies can be modified. The hierarchies can be built from scratch. You can change the order in which things are associated, and you can even combine hierarchies from different sets of data. So I could drill down here from city, province, city, customer. I could add to that hierarchy items, for example, and I could make it part of the one-off hierarchy, or I could add items beside it now. If I was to go to items, we could add items by class, and that would expand our table further. But I could actually have built items into the same drill down and just had items as the last click. You can do either. That's fully modifiable. You actually modify that in the cubes. They're open access. You can change that for yourselves. You can, a BA or a developer, you can change that stuff pretty easily and create your own hierarchies, as long as you don't create something that doesn't work. But obviously from customer to items, when I'm looking at sales, would work. Now let's get a little bit more clever. So we'll leave that closed up for now. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to add date by month to the columns. So now I've got month over month. And I'm going to switch that around to make it that way around. So now I've got by month, posted revenues, and predicted orders based on, in this case, document date, order date. But other dates are available for you. Okay, so let's move date by month. You know what, let's do this. Here you go. So another thing that's really good in Excel that's really simple to do is we can throw a pivot chart on top of this pivot table, and I'm going to go with stacked column chart because I want to see total revenue for any given period. Obviously that's the wrong way around right now, so I'm going to pull customers off and I'm going to move my date by month to my axis. And now all of a sudden, in literally no time whatsoever, I've now got a chart that is showing me both posted revenues and predicted revenues by month for 2017. And if I was to make any change over here, it would change this and vice versa. For anybody that's ever worked with pivot charts before, we can make it look a little prettier. We can do that with it. So now I've got my revenue prediction right now based on what's entered in my system either as a future order or an already fulfilled transaction. So now I've got revenue predictability. Let's do this just to have some fun. We'll come off the pivot chart, and the other thing we can do with this is we can go to the data and we can go to the Analyze tab and we can actually throw slices onto this. So let's pick a slicer. And I'm going to pick the customers by location slicer. This is interesting because what's going to happen here is it's not going to add just one slicer, it's actually going to add all 4 slices. So let's just do that and say OK. And now instead of having it in the chart, what it's going to do is it's going to throw me 4 slices. Country, which are the 4 things that were in the drill down on the location. State, or province if you prefer. City. I'm going to run out of room here. Let me just shrink that a little bit. These are adjustable. And customer. This can all be made to look far prettier than it does on my screen right now. It's all very, very user formattable. But bearing in mind again that this is connected to a live data set, this is actually connected to the cube. If you were to share this spreadsheet with somebody else that had permissions to connect to the cube, they could be looking at the same thing that you're looking at, and it could be filtered by their security without anybody having to do anything. You can share this spreadsheet with somebody else and their security would immediately apply. We can make it pretty, we can change the colors, we do all kinds of things. That blue, we'll make that one orange, and there we are. Lovely. And we'll make that one green. So now I've got revenue forecast for 2017. But because I've added my slices to it, I could now look at it for just the US, and you'll see the data will change, the numbers will change, and all the other filters will change. Let's look at it for Canada. Okay, so you'll see the filters light up and grey out, and they light up and grey out because they're all, as in the previous spreadsheet that we looked at, they're all connected. So now I could go, you know what, give me revenue predictability just for Montreal. And it will change again, and Montreal's looking pretty dismal. I've got a bunch of posted sales in March and virtually nothing else booked for the whole year. So let's look at Halifax, see if that's any better. No, even worse. Halifax doesn't have anything in posted sales and has a predicted one for October. How's about we try clearing that one and picking somewhere that does have a prediction? Let's try Edmonton. Nope. I'm going to give up in a minute. I can't pick a city that's got any revenue in it. The order of these obviously is sortable as well. In the case of this one, it's just alphabetical. Toronto has no revenue either. Let's try that. There we go. Some revenue. Awesome. And all of these can be cleared and reset. So the idea of this was very much a hands-on live demonstration. I just wanted to take the opportunity to show you what you can do out of the box as the last in our series of predictable revenue, but in the case of this one, I wanted to show you a way of doing that from a reporting perspective directly off of GP's analysis cubes. And just show you some of the features and functions of Excel that dovetail into that and give you some very, very powerful analytics right out the gate. So the last thing on my list to talk about was other tools. There are obviously other things that you can connect the analysis cubes to. The analysis cubes can be reported on by SQL reporting services. They can be reported on by TrueSky, which is one of our previous presentations, budgeting and forecasting tool. They can be reported on by Power BI. I'm not sure if anyone's aware of Power BI. That's Microsoft's latest and greatest visualization tool designed to work on any device whatsoever. And Power BI has a connector for SQL Server analysis services. So Excel is by no means the only way of exposing the data that's in these cubes. The power of the cubes themselves is the aggregations, the calculations, the fact that it's offline, and the fact that it's normalized. So field names, table names make sense when you look at them. As you can see, my field is called customer name. It's not called CUSTNAME or anything else abbreviated or shortened for database purposes. But the other thing that's really powerful about the cubes is the stuff that they know that GP doesn't know, like profit, like margin percentage. And then finally that security layer, because that security layer allows you to change what this looks like for every individual that looks at it without doing anything. As soon as they open up this spreadsheet, it will immediately filter to what they've got access to. If they connect to the cube through any other mechanism, it knows who they are, it will filter what they can see. So the power of these things is quite impressive for something that's just on the shelf. So as a reminder, there's a sales cube, a receivables cube, a purchasing cube, a payables cube, and a financials and an inventory cube. So all of the core modules that are in GP related to distribution and financial reporting are available in the cubes. There are not out-of-the-box cubes for other modules. For example, project accounting, for example, field service, for example, manufacturing. There are not off-the-shelf cubes for those modules, but there are cubes available for most of them, either through a third party or through customization, most of them through third parties. If you have Wensoft, for example, there are cubes for job cost available from Wensoft. So there are other cubes available, but these are the ones that ship out of the box. So these are the ones that I wanted to go over today. So with that, my presentation and my rambling on is over. That was today's demonstration of revenue predictability. It was a way of doing reporting on revenue predictability from GP using the power of the analysis cubes, and I just wanted to mention a few of those other tools to you at the same time, just in case you're not aware of them. So with that, my core presentation is over. I would be happy before we wrap up. Kat, do you want to wrap up or do questions first?
We can do questions now.
Okay, so let's do questions.
Okay. So I do have one question here. Will changing the name in the cells update the titles in the cubes as well?
No, overwriting the names in the spreadsheet or in any other report just changes the label. It doesn't make any difference to the actual cube itself. The cube names and the cube table names remain the same. They don't get edited. They don't get modified. There are spare fields available in the cubes that you can rename as well. So there are additional spare fields that can be used if you wanted to bring a particular different piece of data into the cube. But there's a limited number of those, and those could be renamed, but not the main ones.